So today I'd like to show you guys exactly how I made a really nice looking ring out of TPU. It's super comfortable and flexible and super durable, and it all started with this ring, which I didn't do any finishing on. You can see the layer lines, you can even see the seam right there. Well, I wore this for a year straight, never taking it off, through the shower, working and everything, and I was super happy with the durability and the comfort of this ring, so I decided to upgrade it. And this is version 2. You can't even really see the layer lines in it. It's even more comfortable. There's nice rounded edges everywhere, so I'm extremely happy with how this turned out, and I'm going to show you guys every step on how to create this for yourself. So in order to make this ring, there's a couple things that you may need. A sander kind of like this. I paid like 50 euros on AliExpress for this. It's going to make your life a lot easier if you have some sort of sander. I made this little table that slides on here, makes it a little nicer. Also, this chuck here, it allows you to put the ring on there and chamfer the edges. You know, you're going to need some sandpaper as well, and the last thing that you're going to need is a torch. This is a super cheap food torch, so that's pretty much all you're going to need other than your 3D printer and some TPU. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is make our new ring. Now, this is the first one that I made, and it's made to the exact dimensions of the ring that I wanted. It's got the filleting and chamfering already on it, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a simpler version that's a little thicker with no chamfering, and we'll take care of all of that in post-processing. So I'm going to make a sketch on that surface so I can grab this. Looks like it's 22 by 24.5. So I'll just go over here, go 22, we're going to minus 0.4 because we want it to be smaller, and then here it's 24.5, and we're going to add 0.4 here, so it's just 0.4 thicker in both directions. Now let's see, measure from here to here, we got 6 millimeters. So let's just extrude this by 6 millimeters. Okay, now we've got our ring. So alternatively, what you'll probably want to do is, say your ring size is not 22 but 19. You'll minus the 0.4 millimeters, and then you'll offset this by 1.65. And then you'll hit Q and extrude it by 6 millimeters, and there you go. There's your ring. Now I am using Fusion 360 here. You don't have to use Fusion 360 to do this. This is just my software of preference. There's tons of free software that you could use to make this simple shape. Now let's 3D print this. Call it ring. There we go. Okay, so we've got our ring.stl here. Let's go ahead and open that in Cura, and let's look at these settings. Okay, well, let's rotate this down. Okay, give it a slice. The first thing I'm going to do is change it to 0.1 layer height. Now, normally that's 60 layers, so there's a setting I need to change in experimental slicing tolerance exclusive. If it's just a little bit between whether it wants to jump to another layer or subtract a layer, I'll change it to inclusive. It's going to include that layer, so that gives me 60 layers. Okay, so right off the bat I can see we have some travels going around here. Oh, it's because it's ironing. Well, we don't want ironing, so let's get rid of the ironing. Okay, give it a slice. Okay, so that looks a little better. Now, one thing that I'd like to do for wall ordering, let's change this from inside to outside. That is because I want it to start on the inside and do the inside first and then move to the outside, leaving the outside cleaner. The Z seam, that looks okay. It doesn't really matter because we're going to be sanding that seam down and we won't even see it. Now, the printing temperature, I usually print around 220 with my Overture high-speed TPU. However, for the ring, I want the best layer adhesion and want the material to flow as easy as possible. So I'm going to up this to 235. I believe the max temp is 240. Nothing on the build plate. Now for the flow, I'm going to increase this to 105%, just because I don't want any kind of under extrusion going on here. Over extrusion is perfectly fine. It doesn't matter how it looks right now. We're going to be removing this outer layer. Normally I print about 60 with a high speed, but for this I'm going to reduce all of these to 30. I'm going to turn off acceleration control. I'm also going to disable jerk control because it muddies up the G code and puts stuff in there that I sometimes confuse with other things. So one thing that is important is this start point here. When we add our pauses in here to make the middle band, I normally park the print head back here, and we want as straight of a line as possible. We don't want it to have to come over here, or if it was starting over here, it would drag over the print and start the next layer. So here it is. Layer start X, or the Y, sorry, Y of 120. It puts it right there. Okay, 130. Doesn't seem to be changing much, but still, that's okay. As long as it's on the left side here, that is okay. So one thing I forgot to mention before is to disable retract at layer change. We don't want to do that. Okay, so now that we've got that pretty much all set, we're going to go up here to extensions and post-processing, modify G-code. And we're going to add our pauses here. So I usually just do a pause at height. And we want to do it at layer number. And I've done some trial and error to get the band as close to the middle of the ring as possible. And I found that layer 19 is about the best that I could get. And we'll just leave that the same. We definitely want to keep the motors engaged. We want to park the print, and we want to park the print over on this side. So the X, we're going to change that to 0 and 190. Sure, that's okay. Sure, we'll leave that. Now I redo the first or the last layer. So we'll use M109 for standby temperature, and we'll make sure we put the standby temperature at the same temperature. Okay, I like to put a beep, so if I'm doing something else, it just beeps and I know, oh, I gotta go change my filament. It'll beep for 1 second. Okay, so I think that's pretty much set. So we'll add another script and pause at height and by layer number. And the second one I found is 43, layer 43. Again, we'll keep the motors engaged, park the print at 0 and 190. We're going to redo the layer and set the standby temperature of 235. We're also going to beep at the pause. Okay, so that's set. So let's slice this. So let's save this to disk and save it as ring.gcode. Okay. Now that we have our ring.gcode file, we can go ahead and open that up in Cura, and this will allow us to examine every step of the G-code and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So go in here, go to the bottom layer and make sure this is good. That looks good. Now we know that's the same going up. Now let's find the pause here at layer 19, and then we can back it up to right before the pause. Now if you click here and then use your right and left arrow keys on your keyboard, you can step through every step of the G code and see what it's doing. So it does something a little weird here. It goes and then there's something, it moves up a little bit, over, up, and then over. Well, we don't want that. We don't want it to lift up. As soon as it lifts up, it oozes TPU all over the place, and we do not want that. We want it to move right as it finishes, directly over. So we're going to get rid of all of that stuff. So if I open the G-code file and say Notepad++, we can go ahead and find that first pause. So Control F, search for pause, and there we go, layer 19. So what's making that first stop is this extrude command. We don't want it to extrude before it moves. So we're going to get rid of that. And then these two travels are the ones that move it inward. We're also going to get rid of those. And then move up a millimeter to get out of the way. Let's get rid of that. And that's it for that so far. Now if we save that and reload this model, we can go back before the pause, step through, and see that it immediately moves away. That's perfect. Okay, now that it's over here, it moves up, and that's where it pauses. Now at this point is where you unload the filament, put the new filament in, and have it start printing again. But the problem with this is the filament isn't primed, and when you're changing colors, you have to push a bunch of filament through to get that old color out, and then also have it primed and ready to print once it moves over here and starts printing. And the problem I've had many times is it starts printing and it's not primed enough, and it ends up doing this spiraling thing and does that for half the layer, and then your layer adhesion is non-existent, and the ring even just splits apart when you pick it up. So how I fixed that is right before it starts, it's going to extrude about 10 centimeters of filament, and then it'll extrude the whole way over until it starts printing. And yes, it will leave a little a string hanging out here, but that doesn't matter because we're going to clip that off and sand it. So how we do that is right after it's waiting for resume temperature. These are the first commands. Once it starts, these are the first commands. So we don't want it to lower back down to Z2 because we're going to extrude a bunch of filament, and there's going to be a bunch of filament sitting underneath here. So we don't want it to move back down. So what I'm actually going to do is keep this G1 F300. It's a nice slow move, and we're going to extrude 100 millimeters of filament. And it's going to do that before it even moves. So this here is the starting position where it starts to print. Okay, so we'll take this one here. Let's make the speed a little slower so it doesn't rush over there. And then while we're moving, we're going to extrude 10 millimeters of filament. So we also have to lower the Z because in this last command it moved it up to Z15. So we want it to go back down to the level at which it was, and it's easy since we're using 0.1 millimeter. We can use this and know that it's 1.9 on the Z axis. So X, Y, and then we add the Z of 1.9 back down to its starting height. And then we don't need this. So there's one more thing. I want this first layer to slow down quite a bit. So I'm going to change the speed percentage. It's a percentage of the print speed that you can adjust right on the fly without changing any other settings. It's really nice. And it's M220, and then with an S, and then you give the percentage. So I want it to be at about 50%. So it's going to be going about 15 millimeters per second during this. But we don't want that to be 15 millimeters per second the whole way. So down here, well, let's copy this. And down here, the outer wall, go past the outer wall. Let's, okay, here's the next layer, and it moves up to Z2. So right at the end of this layer, we're going to add this and move it back up to 100% speed. So that looks okay. Let's go ahead and save this. Go back here to reload all models. Now let's have a look at this and see if it's a little different. Okay. Right before. Moves right away, moves up. We change our filament. Here it extrudes 100 millimeters of filament, and then 10 millimeters as it moves down here to start printing. Now that we've got that, we still have the next one, which is layer 43. Okay, and the same thing, you just repeat the steps for layer 43. So I'll do it here. Search for pause, and right here, layer 43. Okay, so again, up here we have this extrude before it pauses. We don't want that. We don't want these random travels. And we don't want it to move up a millimeter. Now, does the actual pause, wait for the temperature. Instead of moving back down, we want to extrude 100 millimeters of a filament. Then lower this down to F3000. As it moves back, we want to also move the Z back down to 4.3, since that's the layer that we're at. And then we also want to extrude 10 millimeters of filament while it's moving. Okay, so it doesn't need to move back down to the resume height, but we do want the rest of this stuff. Now we also want to add the speed percentage down to 50% right at the beginning of this new layer, wall outer, and here's the next layer. Right at the end of this layer, we're going to bring this back up to 100% speed. Okay, so let's save that. Reload the model. Go back right before. Pops right off. And then comes back. Okay, now the last thing that we need to do is the end. Now, Cura seems to get this wrong fairly often. So at the very end of the print, it comes to the end and it lifts up and pulls over that direction, then lifts up and then moves away. Well, that's not good. So let's go back here, go down to the bottom, and let's see what's going on here. So it's printing with G1s, then as it's ending, it has an extrude command. Well, we don't want that. Now, I don't want it to retract or anything. I just want it to move off of the print. So we're going to remove that. We're going to remove the retract and raise Z. We're just going to worry about this wipeout here. Now, right now it looks like it's wiping out, well, Y5, X5. That's wrong. We want it to go, say, X minus, say, 15, and Y, no Y, because we're at the left side. So let's go ahead and save that and see how that goes. Right click, reload all models. That looks a little better. And so as soon as it gets done printing, boop, moves away and up and away. Alright, so I think that concludes the editing for this. Okay, so we're at the pause, and I'm just going to pull out the black filament. Today we're going to go with a brown filament. Clip the end of that off. Okay. Now that I have the filament pushed in, I'm going to push a little bit more through. It's not extruding yet. Pull this off of there, and now it's started to extrude. It's going to extrude 10 millimeters. to pull this one off. And there we go. Your layer 43. Z height of 4.3. There it goes. Now pull out the down filament. Put the black filament back in. Pull this out of the way here and hit go. It's going to extrude 100 millimeters. Let's finish this ring. Now it's important that you don't sand along or with the grain or with the layer lines, because it could grab it and peel along the layer line. So it's best if you sand across the grain. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so looks like we have some more to go. So more. Still gotta go. You can see there's a gap between there. So just keep going. Okay, starting to look pretty good. Oh, there's a little bit of a gap there. So gotta go a little bit farther. Look at this. Well, that looks pretty good to me. Now, what we do is we flip it inside out. There. Now, I'm not sure if you can see this, but it's kind of curved right there. That actually works out perfectly, because when we sand it, it's going to sand that flat. So when we turn it back inside out, it's going to be curved and be nice and comfortable for our finger inside. Now, the problem with this is that when you turn it inside out, it's usually oblong. It's not perfectly circular, and it makes it very difficult to sand. So I made this piece that's just a little thinner than the ring and the same diameter of what I want. So I put that on there and keeps it nice and circular. So let's go ahead and sand this side. Okay, now still have to go farther, but you got to be careful not to go too far on this step, or else your ring will be too big. But I know that I can still go a little bit farther. Okay. Now that looks pretty good to me for the inside. I mean, we're not going to see it, but it is going to be against your hand, so that looks pretty good to me. Now, let's pop this out, and let's turn it back right side out. Now we're going to put the chamfers on the edge. So for this, I made this little piece here that I can chuck into this chuck, and it's the same size as the ring, and it's a little thinner than the ring, so I can get in there and sand. There's also a lip here, so it can't go too far. And then if you make one of these, make sure you put a little finger place so you can pull that off, because the first one I made, I put it on there and I had a heck of a time getting it off of there, so I had to put these little finger holes in there to get it out. So all we do here is we just take a regular piece of sandpaper. What's very important is that you don't let it get too hot, especially when you're sanding along the grain, along the layer lines. It'll get too hot really quick, and then it will not sand and melt and look horrible. So the key is to go slow, and then with the back of your finger where you're pressing, you can really feel the heat, and if it gets too hot for your finger, it's probably too hot for the ring, so just go slow and lightly press on it. So I want to put a chamfer on this, so I'm going to try and keep it at an angle. Put a nice chamfer on the outside of the ring. Okay, see what that looks like. It looks pretty good to me. I just want a little chamfer on the outside here. So let's flip it around. Put it on here. And do the same thing. Okay, let's have a look at that. That looks okay to me. Okay, now what we're going to do is on this side, I'm going to put a fillet on the edge of this. I'm going to completely round it over because it's the inside of the ring, and I want it to be more comfortable. Okay, well, that looks okay. Do the other side here. That looks okay. Alright, now let's turn it right side out. Have a look at it. Alright, now comes the final step. I think it's the most important step, and it is the most dangerous step to ruin your ring. Using this torch here. So when you're doing this last step with this, you got to be very careful not to get the ring too hot, or else you'll completely ruin it. Kind of as a rule, I do the first part of this holding it in my hand, and it does get hot sometimes, but it lets you know exactly how hot you're actually getting the ring when you really hold it in your hand. If you get it too hot, it's just going to deform into something like this, and be too big and look horrible. So you just tap it. Just little bits like that. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in so you can see what's happening here. So just tap it, and this is just the first time we're going to go around. And you just got to be very careful not to go too far, and take it slow. I'm just going to put the nice first finish on there, and it's not super glossy right now. And be careful, if you miss and hit your finger, it does hurt. It's not terrible, but try and avoid that. Okay, so we're still going here. Now, I can feel the core temperature of the ring heating up, so just got to keep it slow. We are. Okay, now it looks like we went all the way around. Now the second time, once this cools down, is when it really gets shiny. It's getting hot. Okay. Now you can still see some of the edges aren't completely glossy, but be very careful shooting the flame against the edge of that, or else it makes a mark on there. So just looking real closely at it, you can try and pinpoint areas that are not glossy enough for you. And again, try and turn it this way, because if you turn it this way, you're going to put your finger right into the hot spot and make a fingerprint. Okay, so once you're happy with the surface finish, you can decide whether you want to do the inside or not. I usually do the inside just one time around. I don't want it to be this glossy, because then it kind of feels sticky and sticks to the hair on my finger. I like it to be a little bit smooth, or a little bit of a matte finish on the inside. But how I do that is just kind of tap it on the inside, just really quickly. Do that a couple times around, and you can kind of get this edge here as well. But again, be careful not to get that edge too much, or else you will melt it. Okay. Now that I've done this edge, I kind of want to do this edge too. Okay, so there we go. We've made ourselves a pretty nice looking ring. If I take off mine, put it on here. There we go. I like the way it looks, and it's super comfortable. It's great. So if you like this video, hit that like button, and if you don't want to miss my next video, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.